Joe McScum. Introduction. As mentioned in other stories, Professor John MacLeod was conducting his research along Sukhumvit Road in Bangkok. While his work primarily focused on the wayward girls of Sukhumvit Road, Professor John felt obliged to include other local phenomena in his report. One such phenomenon was Joe McScum. The following is an excerpt from Professor John's research report. Joe McScum, aka Birmingham Scumbag, Wayne. As noted elsewhere, Thailand attracts its fair share of dubious tourists, petty criminals, drifters, and the sort of men various writers, such as So, have bluntly labeled scum. In his book, Thai Light 2, So gives you the lowdown on Thai nicknames, quality tourists, scum tourists, toilets for elephants, Western Romeos, and so on. John would have preferred to forget his particular encounter with Joe McScum, but, in the interests of intellectual honesty, and his so-called research, he felt obliged to record it. The makeshift sidewalk bars along Sukhumvit Road in the early hours provide a strange social laboratory, a mix of tourists, hustlers, dreamers, and opportunists from every corner of the globe. It is also, inevitably, a magnet for less refined specimens. But who, exactly, is Joe McScum? Of course, this report is primarily concerned with the wayward girls of Sukhumvit Road and the strange human circus that performs nightly beneath the neon lights of Bangkok. It cannot devote too much space to the question of Joe McScum, which is perhaps better suited to the editorial pages of some anarchist broadsheet or socialist tabloid. Nevertheless, Joe is one of the key actors upon the great stage of Sukhumvit Road, and therefore cannot be ignored. Joe McScum is not a man so much as a type. He has little money. He probably financed his trip to Thailand by illegal means, or by money squeezed from the generous British welfare system meant for his family of a wife and 6 kids, whom he left behind with vague promises of souvenirs, fake cockroaches, knock-off perfume, and cheap market clothes. He is working class. He may be unemployed, underemployed, a petty criminal, or trapped in some dreary occupation from which there appears no obvious escape. Karl Marx might have placed him somewhere amongst that lumpen proletariat, that untidy social category which forever baffled revolutionaries and political theorists alike. According to Marxist doctrine, Joe ought to direct his anger upwards, towards those who own the banks, newspapers, corporations, and property portfolios. Yet somehow he rarely does. Instead, he loyally purchases newspapers such as The Sun, owned by quasi-fascist billionaires and media dynasties, and absorbs their explanations for why life remains difficult. These explanations usually carry a heavy, illogical racist focus, attempting to convince Joe that his life is hard not because of capital ownership, but because immigrants and refugees are stealing his job, raping local women, and receiving free housing from left-wing governments. The rich, after all, possess newspapers, television stations, public relations firms, think tanks, and advertising agencies. Joe possesses a non-winning betting slip, a pint of lager or 2, and perhaps a ticket from a pawn shop. Thus the battle for Joe's soul is seldom fought on equal terms. The modern media game, according to its critics, is one of division. If working people can be persuaded to quarrel amongst themselves, they are less likely to ask awkward questions about wealth, power, housing, wages, or who owns what. Old slogans are replaced by new slogans, such as White Lives Matter, new tribes emerge to fight old tribes, and the capitalist machine rolls on. In 2026, Joe McScum votes enthusiastically for Nigel Farage and his quasi-fascist and racist Reform UK party. Whether this improves his circumstances is another question entirely, perhaps quite the opposite. Indeed, Joe possesses a long and complicated ancestry. One branch of the family tree leads back to the football hooligans who periodically disgraced the post-war decades. Another stretches back to Mosley's fascist black shirts marching through London streets in the 1930s, intent on undermining Britain's future war efforts against Nazi Germany. The historical connection is no exaggeration. Joe McScum is a modern-day and past-day traitor to democratic Britain, although perhaps unintentionally. He proclaims himself to be a nationalist, but his fascist activities actively undermine the British state. And perhaps we should feel a degree of sympathy for poor old Joe. His wages have stagnated. His prospects are uncertain. His education may have been poor. Factories have closed. Industries have vanished. The future arrives wrapped in the language of globalization, automation, outsourcing, and economic necessity. The neighborhood of his childhood no longer resembles the place he remembers. New populations have arrived, old communities have dispersed, and the white middle classes, who frequently lecture everyone else about tolerance and diversity, often inhabit rather more comfortable, insulated districts themselves. Joe notices these contradictions. Unfortunately, he rarely notices who profits from them. And so he remains what he has always been, a bewildered foot soldier in somebody else's campaign, faithfully fighting battles designed by people he will never meet, while the true winners watch comfortably from the executive boxes. Wayne from Birmingham. One such specimen was Wayne from Birmingham. Built like a rugby forward but fattened by years of cheap lager and greasy chips, Wayne carried himself with the heavy, unearned swagger of a man who believed sheer physical mass was an adequate substitute for charisma or common sense. John had found himself seated next to him at Sally's sidewalk bar. What began as casual conversation quickly took a dark, surreal turn. "Where you from, then?" Wayne grunted, squinty-eyed and suspicious, wiping a trickle of beer from a double chin. "I am from Great Britain," John replied smoothly, adjusting his posture. Wayne snorted, spitting a bit of foam onto the table. "Nah, why ain't? Don't try and play me for a mug, pal. That ain't no proper accent. Where d'ya really come from?" John's accent had long since become difficult to place. Years of wandering abroad had given it a peculiar, mid-Atlantic, theatrical quality that confused as many people as it enlightened. "South African, is it?" Wayne pressed, leaning in close enough for John to smell stale tobacco and fried pork. "Go on, give us the real drum. Don't give me that old shit." John, never inclined to retreat, especially when fortified by a gin and tonic, responded with ice-cold disdain. "I assure you, my dear friend, I am as British as the crown jewels. Though I must observe, your own dialect bears precious little resemblance to anything penned by William Shakespeare. Indeed, there is not a single syllable emerging from your gob that belongs to the proud linguistic tradition of Chaucer." Wayne blinked, his thick forehead furrows deepening as he slowly processed the insult. He leaned forward, broad chest swelling against a sweat-stained polo shirt. "What? You calling me a liar, mate? I'm a black belt, me. Brum's finest. I'll spark you clean out, no bother at all." At this point, a more prudent man than John might have de-escalated. John, however, was high on booze and his own perceived superiority. "You?" John shot back, rising slightly and attempting to adopt what he imagined to be a fierce, working-class cadence to ensure his point hit home. "You couldn't fight your way out of a damn paper bag, you monstrous, immovable fat fuck." Wayne shoved his chair back with a scraping screech, roaring, "Right then. Come on, let's obey it. I'll tear you to shreds." Now, John had no intention whatsoever of having it. Being 30 years older, 4 stone lighter, and possessing a profound aversion to blunt force trauma, he relied instead on what he later recorded in his journal as a tactical withdrawal of supreme elegance. With remarkable agility for an aging pedant, John slipped past the bar stool, sprinted across the pavement, vaulted the concrete central barrier dividing Sukhumvit Road with the grace of a startled gazelle, and made a mad dash for the air-conditioned sanctuary of the landmark hotel opposite. Wayne, considerably less nimble, horribly top-heavy, and entirely blinded by beer, stumbled over his own sandals at the curb and did not follow. The next day, when John was sober, considerably less heroic, and infinitely more rational, he felt a sharp flicker of anxiety at the prospect of crossing paths with Wayne again along Sukhumvit. But the brute was nowhere to be found. In his own mind, John chalked it up as a triumphant victory, not of brute physical power, but of brain over brawn, and, most importantly, of having secured the absolute last word by calling the oaf a fat fuck and publicly mocking his utter lack of mobility.